Hello, everybody, and welcome to the CMI webinar series designed for and by CMI. I'm Cynthia Howell, and I'm the Education, Training, and Outreach Manager for CMI, and I will be your moderator today. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the CMI webinars. They're hosted at Colorado School of Mines, and we are always looking for new topics. So if you have a suggestion for a future webinar, please include it on the exit survey or email cmi.mines.edu. This is a public webinar, and a recording is going to be available next week at aimslab.gov/CMI under the webinar menu. And also we have a YouTube as well as on the critical materials channel. Questions, we are going to hold those till the end. We ask that you type them into the Q&A box anytime that you have them so that you won't forget, and that they will be answered again following the presentation, but it's always really appreciated to have a few queued in and ready for our presenter. I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Dr. Lance Miller. He's worked for over 30 years in the minerals industry throughout North America, from Mexico to the Canadian and US Arctic, in Asia, Russia, Africa. He's also worked in the economic development sector, leading a technology transfer, entrepreneurial business development organization. He's been on several boards and still serves on several boards. He's co-authored over 25 scientific publications, holds a PhD in economic and structural geology from the University of Arizona. And I don't want to take any more time from Lance. I'd like to ask you, Lance, if you would join us and take your presentation over from here.
You bet. Thank you. And good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So I share my screen. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes, good. Very good.
And how is that coming up?
I'll let you know
Good.
when it's on the screen. You're good. Good to go.
Okay. All right. Cool. So yeah, morning again, Lance Miller, and thanks to Maureen and Cynthia for teeing us up, because I'm traveling. I'm actually in Kobuk, Alaska, in the office of the Tribal Council, and joining me here, say hi.
Hello, Kimberly Linus, Vice President on the Kobuk Traditional Council.
So I'm in the Traditional Council's office because we're traveling, doing village visits up north of the Arctic Circle. So today is really kind of just a broad overview about Alaska Native Corps, obviously around the critical minerals, but I have a few things touching on the need for minerals, and then what ANCs are doing, and specifically really what NANA, and a bit about Red Dog and some work with School of Mines. So with that, I will try to do the next screen. It's not moving here, huh? Uh-oh, there we go. It's slow. Yeah. So like I said, want to frame the issue a bit, talk a bit about Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, because that's really kind of pivotal and critical for Alaska, and since Red Dog is the largest critical minerals mine in the US presently. Benefits, challenges, opportunity, and what's next. I really like this quote by Max Planck that of course, mining is not everything, but without mining, everything is nothing. And I guess from a geologist mining perspective, that really says it well. As part of that framing, I kind of like to always look at the longer term, being a geologist, and this isn't even that long a term, considering, people have been around for a while, but it's kind of interesting, the needs for metals these days. And if you look at how long copper's been around, over 7,000 years, zinc over 3,000, the Bronze Age. And what, despite all the recent executive orders and other things from the present administration for metals needed for net zero, what really is driving it, we seem to forget, is the number of people we have. And as this graph shows, by 2050, there'll be potentially around 9 billion people. Metals have been around for thousands of years. And interesting, oil and hockey, ice hockey, came on about the same time, around 1850, 60. So again, petroleum age was sort of new to the timeline for humans. And here we're talking about, transitioning, but metals keep going. This is kind of fun, I thought, is if you look at the human body, which is no surprise, and I think a lot of folks here know this, we're mainly made of oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, and calcium, some other minerals, but we're very much similar to the makeup when it comes to minerals of the Earth's crust, which is actually no surprise. But then, and I guess this is a bit tongue-in-cheek here, but when we're talking about metals intensity, if you look at a cell phone, so the picture on the left, it's roughly 20 years ago compared to today, and just look at the elements in the periodic table, how many more are used in a smartphone today? And then, of course, on the right is all the elements in the human body. I'm not saying that we're like a cell phone, but it is interesting. And granted, not all these elements in the human body are needed. Some of them are just have bioaccumulated, but nonetheless, it's kind of a fun fact to put metals into perspective. So besides what we're made of, what we need, and I think a lot of folks on this video understand that humans are pretty materials intensive. And, a lot of it is basically industrial minerals and such, but of course the metals needed today as well. And again, just one slide sort of, which again, I think a lot of folks here are aware of, but what's often used is the amount of metals needed for an electrical vehicle compared to a conventional car, as the graphs on the left show. And, for example, 10 times more copper and graphite than in present conventional cars as far as kilograms per vehicle. The other thing I'd like to throw out is haven't done it, I'm sure it's been done, but the actual carbon footprint of an EV compared to a conventional car, when you take into account the mining of the metals and then where the electricity is often coming from, would be an interesting comparison. But nonetheless, however we slice it, just look at population increase, the need for net zero. So with renewables, EVs, and so forth, the demand for metals is going to increase significantly. And it's sort of a renaissance for us in the geosciences and mining industry in that regard. Okay, wanted to just transition a bit, and I wish I could, see a show of hands sort of, but if people are aware of Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. And what it is, it's very unique to Alaska. It's not like the reservation system. And basically this was what sort of propagated it, was the discovery of oil on the North Slope and the need for a pipeline going across native lands from the North Slope down to South Central Alaska. Also, the 60s, very much a social time of change in the United States. So the upshot was in 1971, under President Nixon, there was the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act signed. And with it, there was 44 million acres and 12 regional corporations and over 200, or about 170 roughly, village corporations. So these were set up, again, not as reservation model, but the corporations own the surface and subsurface, and then were set up as for-profit corporations. So at the time, business was pretty new to Native Alaskan groups, and it's sort of like, how do you go forth and prosper? And it really, the base was the lands, and Alaska Native Corps are some of the largest landowners, private landowners, actually in the nation, and certainly Alaska. As part of the business line, ANCs and Village Corps have diversified into many different types of businesses. Natural resources are some of the base, but also federal contracting, IT, construction, so forth and so on. And today, the largest native corps or village or regional corps, sorry, have total revenues of nearly $5 billion annually. NANA, the one I work for, this year we were just a bit over $2 billion in revenue. And again, as I said, these are for-profit corporations, but with really a social mission, and that's to benefit the shareholders both socially and economically to basically improve lifestyles and livelihoods. And we do this through, like I said, fully owned companies and businesses, and also partnerships with other companies, and specifically with mining companies when we're trying to grow expertise ourselves. ESG, so environmental social governance, is becoming quite the thing in the corporate world these days. And we always like to suggest that really ANCs embodied ESG from the beginning, because again, it was, you had to make money, but the goal was to take care of the shareholders, but also any development that was done on the lands had to be taken into account, any environmental impact and any impact on subsistence, so hunting, fishing, gathering, because in the NANA region, I forget the exact number, but at least I think 70% of the households depend on subsistence for some of the food consumption. So it's a real thing. So part of ANCSA, Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, was a section called 7I and 7J. And this is really, really unique, is that 70% of any resource revenues that a corporation receives is shared with all the others. The ANC, where let's say a mine or timber, oil and gas comes from, can retain about 30% plus their share, so it might be about 36%. But of that that's shared to the regional corporation, then 50% of that is shared to the village corporations. Remember, there's still 12 regional corporations, and today there's about 170 village corporations. So to put into perspective, today total shared has been around $4 billion. And that's an estimate. We did do a study that's going to be updated, and through 2015, the hard numbers were 3 billion then. So it is significant. And this is shared again with all the other Alaska Native corporations in the state. So I want to talk a bit about the NANA region and touch on some of the impacts related to ANCSA and then this sharing. And this is the NANA region, I think in the lower, let me get these boxes out of the way. Northwest part of the state, mostly above the Arctic Circle. The main hub is Kotzebue on the west side of the map. And today I am in Kobuk on the far east side, which is a village of how many folks now?
Let's see, 250?
250?
Maybe
Really?
less.
Maybe like, yeah, depends. Yep. 200 people. And again, this area, the NANA region, is roughly the size of Indiana. And to put into perspective, there's no roads connecting the villages, and the total population in this region is about 7,500 people. The sort of pinkish reddish areas are NANA land, blue is state of Alaska land, and then the green are conservation units, so national parks and monuments. And in the NANA region, about 70% of the land is actually parks and refuges. And what we're going to talk about a little more detail is in the left side of the screen, Red Dog Mine, which is on NANA land, and the longest road in the region, called the Delong Mountain Transportation System, is 52 miles connecting the road or the mine to a port, and then some of the activity in the Upper Kobuk Mineral Projects area. It's just a picture of Red Dog and the pond, the tailings pond there, and you can see the edge of some of the pits. It is the largest zinc producer in the world at this point in time and has been for several years. That's the country. Again, no trees, north of the Arctic Circle, about 90 miles north of Kotzebue. It was discovered in really in the 60s, and eventual getting a little more timeline production in 89. But importantly, NANA really worked with Cominco, was a company at the time, which is now merged into Teck, to make this a reality. The other thing I'd like to point out, and for the mining folks, is you can't really tell from here the size of it, but it's relatively small. And when the mine was started, it was 24% combined lead and zinc. Today, we're around 15, 16, 17% zinc and a few percent lead. So, incredibly high grade, and just it's not that big of an area, which is nice from the impact perspective. So a little bit on the timeline. Talked about here, the 60s is really when Red Dog was identified. The USGS was working in the Brooks Range in the 50s. And this, again, all coincided, like we mentioned, last ANCSA was 71. And then this was identified to and created quite a conflict between government and industry and Native Corps, NANA specifically. And Senator Ted Stevens at the time said kind of time out and asked the then U.S. Bureau of Mines to do a mineral assessment study. Another side note on this is this very well, if it weren't for NANA, would have become part of the Noatak National Park. So when NANA came in and identified this region for its geology and selected it, it was selected both under ANCSA and then in 1980, some of you may recall, a NILCA, Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act with Jimmy Carter, where that's when much of the Alaska became actually parks and preserves. Agreement was signed in 82 and production in 89. And on the right-hand side here in the lower slide, you can see that's taken from a creek in the Red Dog District today, just to show all the iron oxide, and it's still occurring. The district is incredibly metal rich, and this is how Red Dog was really found. The stream that originally was draining Red Dog had a pH of about 3 at the time. Just wanted to highlight a few really interesting things about development of this project. This is a view looking across the tundra. In the distance, you can see the Chukchi Sea. That's the road being built across the tundra. And this is what is in Cape Krusenstern National Monument. So a road was built across a national monument, and it took NANA, the regional corporation, to go to DC, take people from the villages of Kivalina and Noatak to go back and testify in Congress for this. And it resulted in NANA getting a 99-year lease with the federal government for an easement across a national monument. So pretty crazy that this was done in the day. And the other frame of this is at the time, this was of course right after all the oil in North Slope. So the Sierra Club was had a very strong presence in Alaska and was one of the major opponents for this project at the time. But it was, again, that local support that really made the difference. And here is a map. You can see Kivalina, one of our villages on the coast, Red Dog Mine, upper right, and then Port Site and the road cutting across Cape Krusenstern National Monument. The blue is state land, and then up into the pink area, which is NANA land. And then this is a view looking to the west. So from Red Dog, obviously in the bottom part of the picture, the tailings pond, the pits, Kanaic and Main Pit, and that's pronounced Okaluk, and Pollock is underground. So those are NANA land. And then there's the yellow line and that state land to the west. So right now, Red Dog is the planned closure is 2031, but there is clearly a lot of opportunity in the region. Tech American is exploring on the Anarak and Artigarak deposits, which are going to be deep. They're 2,000 to 3,000 feet below the surface compared to the ones on Nana land, which are right near the surface with a strip ratio of about 1:1. So that it's going to take probably 4 or 5 years of exploration going underground. It'll be $400 million plus to come to a decision, and hopefully we'll be able to extend the life of this district into the future. And why that is important from a regional point of view is today the Red Dog mine forms or consists of about 90%, 85 to 90% of the borough, the government entities, the borough's base budget. So it's called a payment in lieu of taxes, a PILT. And the early leaders at NANA actually were very deliberate about the formation of the Northwest Arctic Borough for self-governance of their region, but you had to have a tax base, and that was Red Dog. To put in perspective, roughly 800 shareholder jobs at the mine, payroll of $50 million a year, significant royalties to NANA and then to the region. And also I mentioned the 7I, and down the lower left of this picture, you can see the $1.84 billion. That is what NANA from Red Dog has distributed to all the other Alaskan Native Corps in from the mineral resource. So when you look at the resource distribution to all the ANCs in the last 7-8 years, NANA and Red Dog have accounted for about 70% of all of it. And of course, zinc price has been up, so that's helped. So a lot of people think of Alaska being oil, and that's what runs the state. But in this sort of framework, and for the Alaska Native Corp world, really in recent years, it's been minerals that's funding things. And then this is just a little bit more to illustrate that. And something I didn't mention earlier is the 12 regional corporations, how they were designed or kind of their borders were based on traditional use. So early group of Alaska, AFN, Alaska Federation of Natives, basically got together and said, hey, these are our traditional regions. And then in those regions, there was land selection that was owned fee simple by the ANCs. But that map on the right shows the rough areas of the regional corps. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about risks. I always like this one. It's E&Y does their top 10 risks to mining, and environment, license to operate, so forth have always been kind of right at the top. And this year, environment and social is number 1, decarbonization number 2, license to operate, which I think is like ESG, geopolitics. So again, the importance of local involvement is critical. One thing though I'd challenge this chart is they talk about productivity and costs as number 10. And to me, that relates to basically grade of a mineral deposit. And in the case of Red Dog, it's so rich, that's what's allowed it to be such a great global model. So you still need really good assets in order to justify the investment, but also that can benefit the local and regional communities. And then kind of going a little more global, thinking about what are the other risks, and this ties into the need for minerals and the executive orders and so forth, is the Belt and Road Initiative of China. And I think many of us know about this. Of course, they're bringing cobalt from the Congo and taking it to China and turning it into end products, and they're getting their tentacles throughout the globe. I was actually in Bayan Obo, the largest rare earth element mine now in the world in about 25 years ago. And I still recall there was a transformer in the pit blue when we were there, and this guys came up with literally a cart drawn by oxen, to fix it with their tools. But importantly, even then you could see they had a long range plan, and they can do that with an authoritative government, not free market based. But there's something to be said when you fast forward decades, when you have that long view. So not passing any judgment, just when we're always worried about quarter to quarter, you kind of forget that long view. And that ties back actually to ANCs, because Alaska Native Corps do have that multi-generational view, both for projects like mining that can benefit generations and generations, but also for the potential environmental risks or societal risks of big projects. So we keep that in mind. Stages, and just like to touch on this for the non-miners, and this is what we're often, even in our region talking about, is so much time is spent on exploration projects, especially in Alaska, that sometimes people forget that they're still in exploration. The one that's in the background of the slide right here and just up the road from where I am today has already been about 70 years since the first real kind of modern exploration. And that head frame behind me was put down in the mid 60s by Kennecott. And today they're still working on a feasibility project for the Arctic deposit, which is about 15 miles from that slide in my background. Of course, issues touch on, you still have to have the resource, and it's got to be good grade, especially in remote areas. And then environmental impact statements, permits have been highlighted by many as being issues, and certainly we're feeling that here, whether it's with the Ambler Access Road, other things nationally, even renewable projects, which are now, I think, getting some, delays basically because of the permitting process. Nonetheless, even at a fast track anymore in the United States, it's 18 years, and hence the little figures of the people down below, from at best exploration to a decision to mine. And on top there, just this was those numbers are from a combined study of I think it was RTZ and Kaminko, but you take several thousand prospects, less than a few percent even go to pre-feasibility, and of that, a 0.x%, basically become a mine. So as we know, we have to look at a lot of ground, a lot of projects to get something that is going to eventually produce metals. And then one more risk, and this is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek one, is the top graphs, 100 years of metal prices in 2015 dollars, so copper and zinc. And we know the cyclicity, and that's another thing that adds to the challenge of projects. When markets are down, you can't get the investment dollars, so you can't get the money in the ground for exploration. By the time they come up, you're way behind the curve on the technical work. But I started thinking about these cycles, and in the north there's something pretty well known of the rabbit lynx cycle. So rabbit population goes up, lynx population goes up, and then they eat all the rabbits, that goes down, lynx goes down. And lo and behold, that cycle's like 8 to 11 years. So it's pretty darn close to the metal cycle. So maybe, for those who are trying to predict metal cycles, the closest can be is biologic cycles like the rabbit lynx cycles. Also want to touch on, which I think is affecting everybody, is workforce. And certainly, whether it's miners driving truck, working in the mill, geologists, engineers, scientists, technicians, it's really, really challenging to get folks. A few of the programs we've done in our region one called Geoforce. It gets kids through Alaska, University of Alaska Fairbanks, gets kids started in like 8th, 9th grade. They do a summer field program and then they track them as a cohort through high school. Alaska Resource Education is another one focused on the younger kids. And then ANSEP is the Alaska Native Science and Engineering program, which also works in middle schools, but goes all the way into college and has been very successful and is just launching actually an acceleration program in high school to help cut down the amount of time you'll eventually spend in college. And one of those is in Kotzebue in our region. So a bit on Red Dog, another view of the mine with some caribou in the foreground, and of course with zinc added to the list of critical minerals. Red Dog is the top producer now. Red Dog also about 80% rather of the revenue is from zinc, and 15% is lead, and the remainder is silver and actually a little bit of germanium, but very small, but nonetheless some germanium as well. And then we started working with the School of Mines, so it's really NANA and Tech Resources. And I didn't really mention, but NANA owns Red Dog, but there's an operating agreement with Tech Resources to operate it. Oops, go back one, I think. Oh, that works. So we started this project, and I guess a few years ago, year and a half ago, and to really look at the tailings. Are there other metals in there that that might be of value? And so that work is ongoing. It's with Elizabeth Holly and crew. There we go, that one. And this was a recent abstract published by Nina there at School of Mines as well. So we're looking forward to more results out of this, but it's a start again. And I think the program, that they're doing, this sort of called the Growing Convergence Research Project, is kind of a cool concept. And I think the whole industry is transitioning. It's not just about you making money, but being optimum resource efficiency, and clearly the sustainable development benefiting local communities is critical. And again, I think Red Dog is a great model for that. And please follow up with me if people have more questions, because there's a lot more to cover on that one than time allows today. So pulling back a little bit more, another view of the NANA region. We talked about Red Dog in the upper left there. Those other deposits, Anarak, Tigurok, I mentioned, they're on state lands, so not NANA land, but they would be milled through the mill on NANA land. So we're discussing options with Tech at the present time. In the region for other resources, there is a potential for natural gas, but right now it's not it's wildcat play, not really economic. Gravel is important at the local level. And then we're doing some of our own funded base metal and gold exploration, especially in the southern part of the region. And then finally, just want to touch on the Upper Kobuk Minerals Project, which is near Kobuk here. And the metals there are copper, zinc, lead, silver, gold, and some cobalt as well, actually. And just a couple of views so folks see what the country looks like. The one on the left is like the one behind me. That's Bornite Camp. In this case, you're looking to the north toward the Brooks Range. And then the drill rig there is up on the Arctic deposit, and then another picture of the camp below. So again, this is the Arctic deposit is under pre-feasibility study. It's NANA is involved, but it's a joint venture which is funding the project between Trilogy Metals and South 32. And part of the issue there is access, and that's why the EIS was done for the Ambler Access Project, and right now that's kind of was remanded by the Biden administration and presently is going through a supplemental EIS. And then just the last few slides here, one to kind of zoom back out and talk about ANCSA lands again. And, you know, it's really interesting when you look at ANCSA lands, where were they selected? And originally it was done really for two reasons. One, around villages and rivers, waterways, so subsistence related. And then the second was for principally for mineral resource development. This map in the light gray shows mineral occurrences from the state and federal database of all deposits across Alaska. And then the dark, you can see are ANCSA lands. So, you know, no surprise that ANCSA lands cover most of the significant metal belts in Alaska. And this is just another view of it, showing the ANCSA lands and some of the more significant projects on ANCSA land. Red Dog, we talked about. Upper Kobuk Mineral Project is partly on ANCSA land. And then Donlin Creek, or Donlin Gold, down in the Chilista region, which is on Chilista land. So what's next, and kind of zooming way out, you know, big picture, I think we're all pretty keen aware in the initiatives you guys are doing. Where is the United States with metal production, processing, and manufacturing? We're just, by most math that you can do, aren't going to accommodate the demand due to discovery, permitting, logistics, financing, all that. But even if, you know, most mines today could be turned on, we still wouldn't get there. Pitch for Alaska and hopefully made a bit of the case that the mineral potential, and with ANCs, the lands they hold, and other state lands, great opportunity. I looked at, if you look at British Columbia, the number of mines there compared to Alaska, we today have 5 metal mines. If we were even like British Columbia per square kilometer, we would have about 18 metal mines. So, you know, we're truly underexplored here. But I think a lot of this has to go to the federal level. We're seeing these new policies and executive orders and even some financing subsidies, but you know, how are they being deployed? When you see some of the money going to a company which is still getting its resource from another country, it's kind of odd, rather than developing domestically. And then finally, maybe some actions. You know, we always rediscover the wheel and the Green New Deal, Green New Deal, and net zero. But you look back on it, and 40 years ago, and after the oil crisis and other things, there was a lot of action. And in 1980, there was a National Materials and Minerals Policy Research and Development Act, the big one. So one thing, maybe that should be dusted off and put some more teeth into it. Maybe we need some things such as we had before, like the Bureau mines. So I know I covered a lot. I kind of wanted to make it sort of a taster here. And with that, happy to take any questions.
Lance, thank you for a great presentation, very thorough, very interesting, looking at the pros and cons of mining, how metal rich Alaska is, and the process that being able to mine has to go through, and timeline, which just really seems to be such a long amount of time to really get resources out to from Alaska or anywhere out to the industries that need those materials. Great, again, wonderful review on the abilities and the resources available in Alaska right now. I'd like to open this up for some questions. So we're kind of waiting here to see if anybody has any additional questions. We also appreciated the fact that you really helped explain the Alaska Native Corporation and how NANA is affiliated and the work going on there. because that is a little bit more complex. The exciting part of it is how that really helps economically the Alaskan natives and people in Alaska. So that's kind of exciting. Any other thoughts that you have, Lance, as we finish this out? Just other thoughts or ideas to the work that you're doing? It was nice to hear you're doing some great work with mines. So thank you on that.
Yeah, no, and I'd actually throw out a request. If anybody knows much about cobalt, give me a shout, because we're trying to look at there's challenges extracting that from the copper ores at Bornite. But there is a couple of questions. One is, can you speak a bit more about the potential minor metals such as gallium and germanium at Red Dog? And I can't speak a lot. Germanium it's not, trying to remember the amount of ppms right now. It's pretty insignificant. Gallium, not significant. Sometimes it's come up that there's indium, but indium I know is on the order of like 20 ppm, so not even recoverable. And the other thing about germanium is the only reason it's being recovered is really because of trail, because no other smelters are recovering, at least that they're telling us about. So, but yeah, hopefully maybe the CSM studies will find more things in the tailings. And then another question, how could research anticipate and accelerate the permitting process? I think a big one that happens time and time again is people talk about not enough baseline studies, and some of it's just technical, but I wonder, and we're doing some of this actually related to permafrost around Red Dog and in the Nana region, is getting some baseline research, if you will, that can help, or basic research that can help with baseline studies. So that's one place I think I can do it. It could apply. Also, I believe some of the research might be already out there that could be used for permitting, but I think we all know there's sometimes kind of silos between academia, industry, and even government. So I think there's bridges to be built there. Question on how do roads factor into prospecting? Let's see how I can answer that. I'm not sure they really do in Alaska for prospecting, because the distances, there's just not the infrastructure, and distances are so great. So you're going to fly, basically, helicopter, plane. However, more and more, I think, as people look around the world, what maybe another way to answer this question is, if there is access to roads for a potential way to get material out, then there is more prospecting around that. So I guess that's another answer to it. They could factor fairly significantly now as being the proximity to prospective areas. Because if you can't get material out, then I think a lot of companies are just going to other jurisdictions where they think the likelihood is, if that helps. Makes sense.
Looks like another question. A couple of questions just popped up here.
Yep. Could you touch on some of the challenges of mining in the Arctic, especially in the winter? You bet. It's not that bad, really. At Red Dog, the biggest issues are really storms. So that 52-mile road, you have to take the concentrate from the mill at the mine to the port, and there's these big warehouses to store the lead and zinc concentrate. So we have only 100-day shipping season for the sea lift. So it's all has to be stored. We've had big storms that you can't really drive on the road, and there's only about 7 days storage at the mine of concentrate. So if you have a 10-day stretch of shutdown of the road, then you're kind of getting, you have to slow down production. But otherwise, and that's just, once in a while. It's really not that bad, except for the shipping. The shipping is a concern as far as working in the Arctic. Absolutely. Could you share more about your efforts in environmental social aspects? Sure. At Red Dog, been a lot of work on water. I think mining projects are really water projects. And there is a village 50, 60 miles downstream. We monitor that. There is some discharge during the discharge season. There's a mixing zone. But we do fish studies, aquatic studies. In fact, I mean, a way that's often referred to or example is the original mine, as I mentioned, had a pH of like 3, the creek. So fish didn't come there. With the mining and then the water treatment, actually the fish started coming back up. So there has to be a weir to keep the fish from coming up. And then social aspects, I think that's just pretty huge. I mean, Nana's ability to pay a dividend to shareholders largely has come from Red Dog. Like I said, the borough is 85-90% supported the government entity by Red Dog as well. And then of course jobs. And then there's a lot of there's another thing that I didn't touch on. It was in one of the slides called the Village Investment Fund, which comes from Red Dog for infrastructure projects in the village, and that's now up at around $53 million. See, another question: where is the zinc and lead concentrate sent for processing? It is right now, I think we're at about 7 or 8 smelters around the world. Rough numbers: a third goes to Canada, a third to Asia, and a third to Europe.
Hey. Great. I would like to say again, thank you so much, Lance, for a great presentation. I know there are going to be a lot more questions coming your way. And it's just so promising to see what Alaska has to offer in terms of metals. Incredible. Glad that Colorado School of Mines also is doing work with you. I want to thank everybody for attending. This recording is going to be available next week at aimslab.gov/CMI on YouTube, on the Critical Materials Institute channel. Also, again, these webinars are designed for you and by you. So any recommendations for the future, we are ears open here for and wanting to hear from you. So please do let us know if you have an idea for a webinar. And again, Lance, thank you so much for a great presentation. Did you see any other questions out there?
I don't. And again, thanks to the Kobuk Traditional Council here for letting me use their space for this today. So.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you in February.